The void stretched before us like a canvas of infinite black, punctuated by the distant shimmer of suns we had catalogued and conquered long before humans had learned to count the days. From the bridge of the flagship Oblivion Ascendant, we observed the blue planet in clinical detachment, scanning, analyzing, calculating. It orbited its sun like any other primitive world. Yet something in the patterns of its surface activity caused a faint, unquantifiable disturbance in our algorithms. Not fear, not recognition. Something subtler, like the flicker of awareness in a nascent intelligence. Sensors picked up dense concentrations of carbon-based life, primitive yet strikingly organized. The signals were chaotic in their simplicity, hundreds of thousands of individual units moving in apparent disorder, yet forming emergent patterns we had not anticipated. They had no knowledge of us yet. Our initial transmissions had been ignored, or worse, misinterpreted as natural anomalies. It amused us. These creatures, with their fragile constructs, their feeble machines, their slow, clumsy attempts at flight, believed themselves sovereign of their tiny corner of the cosmos. Their arrogance, so small, mirrored ours once, long ago. We catalogued their defenses. Scattered fleets, slow-reacting orbital cannons, defensive satellites with primitive targeting arrays. Ground forces were minimal. Mechanical shells of war that barely matched the scale of their cities, armed vehicles that could not traverse the terrain of many regions, and weapons whose energy output barely reached the threshold of lethality by our standards. Political factions bickered endlessly. Their leaders' messages intercepted were incoherent in their human logic. To us, conquest was inevitable. A minor engagement, a demonstration of superiority, and the planet would fall. Yet something subtle, stirred unease within the command circuits. Reconnaissance drones passed over city grids, and we observed patterns that should have been predictable, but were not. Humans moved in formations that seemed random to the naked sensor, but revealed intelligence in subtle ways. Small gatherings in quiet squares. Faces turned skyward, hands raised in a gesture we could not immediately decode. Their eyes, glowing faintly under atmospheric reflection, scanned the heavens as if expecting us, though they could not know we were near. We adjusted our calculations. Probability matrices recalculated. Simulations ran and re-ran. Nothing matched what we saw. Humans exhibited behavior we could not quantify. Anticipation, coordination, silent communication without channels, gestures, and movements that bent the limits of our modeling. Anomalies compounded. We documented them meticulously, yet each anomaly opened a door to more questions. Their resilience, or perhaps their unpredictability, was now a variable we could not ignore. Our arrogance faltered briefly, a flicker in the otherwise precise logic of conquest. For countless centuries, the galaxy had bent before our strategies. Worlds fell with minimal resistance. Systems capitulated before we even engaged. And now, on this tiny blue orb, a species whose entire civilization could be wiped out in hours displayed patterns of behavior that defied our expectations. It was neither military prowess nor technological might. It was something else, something intangible. We watched a fleet of their small, slow-moving ships respond to atmospheric disturbances in unison, altering course with an efficiency that should have been impossible. On the surface, humans coordinated rescue efforts after a natural disaster, a flood, the sensors indicated, yet the precision, speed, and quiet order of their response was uncanny. Civilians and soldiers worked seamlessly, instinctively, without hierarchy. Our analysts flagged it as a computational anomaly. I flagged it as interesting. From the observation deck, the planet shimmered with the muted blue glow of oceans and the golden light of cities. Smoke rose in thin columns from industrial regions. Electrical networks flickered in patterns that betrayed a species awake long into the dark. Their soundscapes, the subtle energy of civilization, filtered through our detection arrays. Engines, footsteps, voices, laughter, cries, alarms. A symphony of chaos that somehow produced harmony. It was not war they were preparing for. Yet somehow, in their normalcy, they were preparing. We spoke among ourselves in the alien tones of the fleet, analyzing, debating. The commanding AI noted, "Conquest feasible within 48 standard cycles." Yet in the flicker of neural lattices, a question lingered. Could our predictions account for this species' unpredictable will? Could a creature so small, so fragile, so ostensibly inferior bend the outcome of events beyond our control? Our sensors could not measure spirit, nor could our algorithms anticipate courage. And yet it seemed present. We pressed on, for what else could we do? To us, it was a routine prelude to domination, a dance we had perfected over millennia. The humans were unaware of the storm that approached, unaware that the heavens themselves had shifted with our arrival. They looked up at the sky with curiosity, wonder, and perhaps something like hope. I noted the irony. Their small minds, incapable of seeing the scale of what loomed, were brave in ways we had long since abandoned. And then, as our orbital surveillance completed its pass, an anomaly appeared again, a pattern in the cities that had no precedent in our archives. Human gatherings shifted, moved, coalesced into geometric forms that made no practical sense, yet seemed deliberate, intentional, almost ritualistic. Was it coordination? Was it instinct? Was it premonition? Our sensors could not tell, but it was enough to make even the oldest commanders in our fleet hesitate, if only for a heartbeat. To us, it was a calculated minor prelude to a campaign. To them, it was the calm before a storm they could not yet fathom. And somewhere in the quiet blue of the planet below, the first threads of resistance, the first hints of human resilience, were beginning to weave themselves into a tapestry that would soon engulf us entirely. And as our fleet moved closer, engines thrumming softly in the void, the question began to echo across the bridge of the Oblivion Ascendant. What if the unpredictable could not be contained? What if the fragile could not be crushed? The hum of anticipation resonated in every alloyed bone of the ship, a warning we did not fully understand. For the first time in millennia, conquest felt uncertain. And then it began. The descent began slowly, the flagships slicing through the upper layers of their atmosphere like a shadow across fragile glass. From orbit, the planet's largest city sprawled beneath us, a lattice of lights and motion, a living organism breathing in chaotic rhythms. We had calculated the population density, the distribution of military installations, the economic centers, and yet no equation could capture the pulse of life, the subtle randomness of movement, the human chaos. Their government scrambled immediately. Signals from command centers crackled across our sensors, uncoordinated transmissions, orders repeated, corrected, then contradicted. Each dispatch arrived with delay, each channel intersecting and overlapping, creating a cacophony of confusion. Their fleets mobilized slowly, vehicles wheezing into motion, aircraft lumbering like insects under a magnifying glass, defensive batteries pivoting too late, too slow. They were ill-prepared, ill-organized, and fundamentally vulnerable. By all metrics, we should have overwhelmed them effortlessly, yet we had underestimated the something, the spark, that lay within their species. As our first dropships hovered above the city, humans poured into the streets. Most fled as expected. Panic was visible in every movement. Families clutched children, crowds scattered in waves, vehicles abandoned mid-road. And yet there were others. They approached. Alone or in pairs, they moved toward our landing zones without weapons, without shields, without even armor. Our scanners identified them immediately. Small, fragile bodies, heart rates elevated to dangerous extremes, faces reflecting fear in ways we could read but not comprehend. A species aware of impending annihilation, and yet moving willingly into its shadow. Our troops had been primed for resistance. The screams, the retaliation, the fire. Instead, they encountered silence and audacity. It was as if the humans understood that nothing they carried could match the might descending from above. And yet, they walked forward anyway. Fear emanated from them, raw and tangible, rippling across their physical forms, but it was accompanied by something alien to us. Courage that was independent of logic, independent of self-preservation. It was as if their very essence had chosen to defy probability, to resist before a single weapon had fired. We observed as their primitive defense systems activated, though the effect was minimal. Missiles launched from the surface arced into the air with the elegance of desperation. Ground vehicles moved in disjointed formations, some colliding, some misfiring. Aircraft engaged, slow, lumbering, predictable. Our calculations predicted rapid suppression. Instead, human operators adapted in real time. Minor errors were corrected spontaneously, improvised maneuvers executed instinctively. They were not superior in technology, far from it, but their actions carried intent, purpose, and unpredictability that confounded our automated battle simulations. And yet, it was the unarmed who fascinated us most. Children stood on rooftops, faces exposed, eyes wide as if daring the sky to strike them. Citizens gathered in squares, unprotected, gesturing to our descent with hands that trembled yet remained steady. They made no strategic sense. We expected resistance, yet their resolve was passive, silent, defiant. It radiated outward like a current, affecting even our soldiers. Confusion flickered across our ranks as the first dropship was approached, not attacked, by a solitary human, arms raised, palms open. Our sensors interpreted it as a threat signal, a trap, but it was none of that. The human's eyes met our surveillance optics unflinching, conveying a clarity we could not model. We are here. Do what you will. For the first time, our commanders paused. Calculations that had taken milliseconds now required recalculation. Probabilities fractured. In the silent defiance of a species so small, our predictive certainty faltered. How could this species, so fragile and unarmed, possibly resist an entire fleet poised above them? Yet the answer became terrifyingly clear. Resistance was not always measured in weapons, in firepower, in speed or armor. Resistance could exist in will alone, in cohesion of purpose, in courage unmoored from advantage. Across the city, we recorded the phenomenon in hundreds of locations, families protecting strangers, individuals shielding others at personal risk, entire communities improvising defensive positions without orders, without coordination, and without visible expectation of survival. Their actions were spontaneous, adaptive, and impossibly fluid. Every predicted casualty we had calculated decreased as humans moved in ways we could not anticipate. Every attempt to subdue them failed to account for an unquantifiable variable, their determination. Our troops on the ground began reporting anomalies in sensor readings. Patterns of electromagnetic activity, heart rates, neural outputs, even social clustering, generated effects that interfered with targeting systems. The humans were unarmed yet somehow disruptive. Their courage, their collective will, manifested as an energy our science could detect but not explain. Even our AI struggled to account for it. Algorithms failed to converge. We could not process the equation. Humanity was a variable that resisted quantification, and still they advanced. Not all, but enough to pierce the veil of our assumptions. Some moved into open zones between our landing craft, hands empty, faces forward, inviting destruction. The logic of their action was incomprehensible. How could they knowingly risk death without weaponry? How could such fragility confront annihilation with such deliberate defiance? It was reckless yet methodical. Fear and bravery fused into something new, a force that could not be ignored, measured or defeated by conventional calculation. From the bridge, I observed the unfolding tableau like a scholar witnessing the rise of a phenomenon beyond comprehension. These creatures, so small, so fragile, so ill-equipped, possessed an internal logic that our systems could not parse, resolve in the absence of survival advantage. They fought because they must, not because they could. Every human I watched defied expectation, not by breaking physical laws, but by bending the rules of probability itself. Even in panic, they were coordinated. Even in vulnerability, they were unbroken. Our confidence waned. Tactical superiority, numerical advantage, and technological might, all the hallmarks of our dominance, crumbled in the face of something intangible. Something ancient in essence, invisible in metrics, yet palpable in the atmosphere, the human spirit. Our calculations, once immutable, now trembled. Could a species so small dictate terms to an entire fleet? Could courage alone fracture an invasion? These were questions our science could not answer. And as the first human approached a landing bay, alone, unarmed, With eyes bright and unflinching, the fleet froze. Engines hummed, drones hovered, weapons calibrated. All expected resistance, all anticipated the usual. What we encountered instead was something alien even to us. Choice without compulsion, bravery without necessity, life asserting itself in defiance of annihilation. In that moment, the calculation became terrifyingly clear. Humans did not fight like other species. They fought because they must, not because they could, and then the unthinkable happened. Across the city, hundreds began to rise simultaneously, converging on positions that should have been untenable, moving as one organism of unpredictable intent. Our tactical sensors registered the surge, but the models refused to accept it. Probability curves fractured. The fleet trembled, as if sensing at last the storm we had thought impossible. The first engagement was about to begin, and we were already losing control. Ground operations began at first light, though the concept of light held little meaning beyond the thin, filtered spectrum of their sun. From the observation deck of our command craft, we watched the sprawling city below, assuming control would be instantaneous. Structures appeared fragile: glass towers, concrete grids, metal spires. The sensors indicated vulnerabilities, weakness, points of entry that promised rapid domination. And yet, as our first units touched the streets, we began to see the first anomaly. Beneath what seemed simple facades lay intricate redundancies. Our scans initially missed them: underground tunnels, reinforced shelters, hidden arsenals, and wiring that could reroute energy in seconds. Buildings that appeared abandoned contained humans, silently observing, repositioning, and waiting. Every move we made was met with resistance, but not resistance in the conventional sense. It was instinctive, adaptive, almost preternatural. These humans did not merely react, they anticipated. Our first squads advanced, expecting routine suppression of fragile targets. Instead, we found traps, corners rigged for ambush, intersections transformed into kill zones, narrow alleys concealing teams that coordinated flawlessly despite minimal technology. Our troops noted with increasing alarm that the environment itself seemed weaponized against us. Cranes collapsed unexpectedly, barricades fell precisely where our sensors predicted they would not, and vehicles we deemed immobile became improvised artillery. Every advance was delayed, every movement calculated without our input. Weapons that should have caused negligible damage inflicted disproportionate losses. Small arms, crude explosives, improvised projectiles, each strike executed with timing and precision that confounded our models. We observed a human squad taking cover behind a collapsed structure, firing intermittently, repositioning without orders, communicating in silent gestures or subtle sounds that our systems could not decode. Even our most advanced predictive AI faltered. Simulations that had assured us of near-total dominance produced failure states at every iteration. The most disturbing observations came from the young. Adolescents and even children displayed instincts far beyond their apparent intelligence. Some carried out defensive maneuvers as if rehearsed. Others improvised with improvisations that defied all probability. A boy of perhaps 10 years lured a reconnaissance drone into a narrow alley, collapsing scaffolding to neutralize it, then melted into the crowd before recovery units could respond. A girl redirected small vehicles to obstruct troop formations, turning infrastructure itself into a weapon. They did not merely follow orders, they understood objectives and executed with autonomous precision. Patterns emerged, subtle yet undeniable. Humans predicted our maneuvers, often before we could execute them. Ambushes were positioned not randomly, but according to anticipated lines of movement, suggesting cognitive mapping at a level we had never observed outside of higher-tier species. Their improvisation was elegant, fluid, almost artistic in its execution. Each movement carried intention, each decision a ripple of calculation invisible to our sensors. Technology alone did not explain these outcomes. Will, cunning, resilience, these intangibles defined the battlefield. We recalibrated our strategies, slowly, painfully. Standard assault formations were abandoned. Algorithms that had calculated victory with certainty now produced incomplete, fragmented projections. We began to notice human adaptability as a force multiplier. Failed attacks were analyzed in real time. They adjusted within moments, reconfiguring defensive positions, rotating units, exploiting weaknesses in our approach. One after another, our assumptions crumbled. Even as our dropships landed and reinforcements deployed, the humans' instinctive coordination continued. Civilians improvised support roles, delivering ammunition, guiding units through concealed paths, even distracting our troops with what we initially interpreted as erratic behavior. What we assumed was disorder was in fact deliberate, chaos used as camouflage, uncertainty weaponized. A simple diversion could mask the placement of a hidden sniper team or a makeshift explosive. Their ingenuity reshaped the battlefield in ways no AI could anticipate. We observed a single block of buildings where our units had been expected to advance rapidly. Yet the humans had anticipated our approach. Electric lines were rerouted, doors locked remotely, debris positioned to create choke points. When we finally entered, every corner yielded resistance. Every turn presented a tactical surprise. Our forces were forced into delays that multiplied across the urban grid. What should have been simple, occupying a district, took hours of painstaking navigation and confrontation, and yet even with the chaos, humans displayed cohesion. There were no rogue movements, no breakdowns under pressure. Errors were corrected instantaneously. Teams that had suffered casualties seamlessly incorporated replacements, redistributed responsibilities, and continued operations with minimal disruption. Their logic was alien. The survival of the individual seemed secondary to the operation, yet this sacrifice produced results beyond calculation. Every engagement was a blend of instinct, intelligence, and something deeper, an internal resilience that could not be measured in metrics. The psychological impact on our forces became apparent. Units trained and disciplined began to hesitate. Confidence faltered as each encounter produced outcomes contrary to expectation. Sensors registered heightened stress levels, erratic decision-making, and small errors compounded by uncertainty. The humans, though fragile and lightly armed, introduced a variable we could neither eliminate nor predict. By midday, we observed that even the young were shaping outcomes. Adolescents commandeered vehicles, improvised barricades, and redirected enemy units with uncanny timing. Some were entirely unarmed, yet they manipulated the environment to disrupt our formations. Small teams executed maneuvers that seemed rehearsed yet spontaneous, actions that suggested foresight, anticipation, and ingenuity combined in a way that defied logical modeling. From the command bridge, the conclusion was undeniable. This species did not merely survive, they learned, improvised, and anticipated. Each encounter shattered assumptions. Each skirmish demanded recalibration. Each observation produced anomalies we could not resolve. Will alone had become a weapon, cunning a shield, resilience the unseen artillery that no technology could suppress. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the scarred cityscape, we realized the unsettling truth. Our dominance, assured by centuries of conquest, was no longer certain. We had assumed weakness, and in that assumption, we had overlooked the most dangerous element of all, a species that defied expectation at every turn. The humans had become an unpredictable force, a puzzle whose solution remained tantalizingly out of reach. Every corner held surprise. Every street offered resistance. Every human a potential disruptor. Our calculations faltered not because of error, but because we were witnessing something outside of algorithmic comprehension, something alive in the truest sense. And then, from the depths of an unassuming alley, a human squad emerged, coordinated, silent, and precise, and the first counteroffensive began. We had underestimated them, and in that instant the battlefield shifted. What we thought was simple occupation had transformed into survival against an intelligence we could not predict. The humans were no longer passive. They were awake, and we were already beginning to lose. The war had stretched longer than our initial simulations had allowed. What we expected to be a swift campaign, a demonstration of superiority lasting mere cycles, had become a grinding, unpredictable confrontation. From the high command chambers aboard the flagship Oblivion Ascendant, we observed fleets we had dismissed, presumed irrelevant, now swarming in formations that violated every known tactical principle. They moved like fluid storms, bending, twisting, exploiting the rigid geometries of our armadas. Every advance we attempted was met with unforeseen opposition. Every calculated strike yielded losses disproportionate to engagement. Disbelief rippled through the command ranks. Veteran strategists, seasoned across countless conquests, whispered among themselves in tones that betrayed fear. Reports streamed in from reconnaissance drones and ground units. Battalions that had been counted as secure or destroyed re-emerged in unexpected locations, ambushing our supply lines, sabotaging communication hubs, and neutralizing weapon emplacements without apparent planning. It was not disorganization. They were precise, adaptive, and terrifyingly cohesive. The humans did not merely react, they initiated. While our forces recalibrated, realigned, and executed pre-planned maneuvers, humans exploited the rigidity of our strategies. Entire campaigns unraveled as if the battlefield itself had been rewritten. Each human unit operated with a degree of initiative that confounded our predictive models. Psychological warfare unfolded with a subtlety we had never observed. Humans allowed weaknesses to appear: abandoned districts, unfortified sectors, isolated squads, but each vulnerability concealed layers of deception. They baited us, drew our forces into traps where the very advantages we relied upon, our firepower, our armor, our technology, became liabilities, alien intelligence systems, normally infallible in war calculations, strained under the constant adaptation. Algorithms failed to converge. Predictions collapsed under the weight of fluid human behavior. The more we attempted to model their actions, the more chaotic the results became. We realized, gradually and with growing dread, that the human's unpredictability was not a flaw, it was a weapon. Each decision was calculated not by logic alone, but by instinct, experience, and something that defied computation, an internalized sense of collective purpose. Patterns emerged that chilled even the most experienced among our commanders. Humans willingly sacrificed themselves for others. A single unit would expose itself to overwhelming fire, drawing attention away from comrades, and continue fighting despite injury or imminent death. Calculations attempted to quantify this behavior, but the results were meaningless. Loyalty and courage were unmeasurable forces, and here they manifested in their purest form. Captured units, instead of demoralizing their kin, became symbols of defiance, reinforcing the resolve of the living. Every action seemed to echo beyond its immediate consequence, influencing morale, strategy, and outcome in ways we could neither predict nor control. The concept of collective spirit was alien to us. Our species calculated advantage individually, yet these humans, these fragile, imperfect beings, operated as if each individual carried the weight of the whole. A human commander fell? Another took the position immediately, anticipating next moves without hesitation. A squad annihilated? Nearby units adapted seamlessly, covering the gap, counterattacking in a manner that suggested preemptive understanding. Every engagement, every loss, strengthened their resolve instead of weakening it. From our observation decks, the battlefield seemed to bend around their will. Fleets we had labeled inferior formed defensive lattices with timing that confounded coordination protocols. Ground units exploited terrain in ways our simulations could not predict. Narrow alleys became ambush corridors. Open plazas became traps for advancing armadas and civilians, seemingly powerless. Subtly influenced outcomes by directing units, blocking paths, and creating distractions that multiplied operational efficiency. Every human, it seemed, was a force multiplier. The psychological impact on our forces was profound. Confidence faltered, hesitation spread, and minor errors cascaded into strategic failures. Units that had been trained for perfection reacted with uncertainty when faced with humans' fluid tactics. Even the most disciplined soldiers paused at moments, scanning for traps that our intelligence systems warned were unlikely but turned out to exist. Fear, previously irrelevant in our conquest, became a tangible presence in the ranks. The humans, weak, fragile, technologically inferior, had imposed fear upon us through resolve alone. One engagement encapsulated the change entirely. We had anticipated an easy sweep of a key industrial district. The terrain had been mapped, defensive systems identified, and resistance presumed minimal. Yet upon arrival, our troops were met with an orchestrated convergence. Improvised barricades delayed movement. Sniper teams struck from hidden vantage points. Civilians redirected our units into kill zones, and small squads executed maneuvers that had clearly anticipated our every move. By the time the first assault wave reached the heart of the district, significant portions of the armada had been compromised. What should have been an easy victory had become a catastrophic attrition. Even more alarming, their unpredictability was contagious. We observed captured human units maintaining composure under interrogation, not merely resisting but influencing others to continue fighting, sending encoded signals through civilians, movements and visible demonstrations of courage. It was as if the very act of standing unbroken communicated instructions, guidance, and inspiration to those still engaged. Our attempts to disrupt these networks failed repeatedly. Each human we thought neutralized became a vector of reinforcement rather than a loss. As the war escalated, the humans' improvisation became audacious. Entire fleets appeared in locations we had assumed unreachable. Counterattacks emerged from sectors we had designated as secure, and ground units coordinated with a sophistication that our predictive models could not accommodate. They exploited the rigidity of our formations, turning what we considered superior positioning into traps, reversing momentum, and destabilizing entire theaters of conflict. Each success reinforced the next. The humans did not merely survive, they dictated the tempo of engagement. By the second cycle, dread had begun to replace our arrogance. We, who had never encountered an adversary capable of challenging our supremacy, found ourselves outmaneuvered by creatures we had assumed inconsequential. Our engineers and tacticians recalibrated continuously, yet every adjustment produced only marginal improvement. Every offensive faced adaptation. Every victory, no matter how tactical, carried consequences we had failed to foresee. The collective spirit of humanity was now visible across multiple theaters. Units who had not met on the battlefield behaved as though connected by a single consciousness. Morale, strategy, and instinct flowed through their ranks as a singular, intangible force. Each act of courage multiplied exponentially. Each sacrifice strengthened the will of others. Even when confronted with annihilation, they adapted, improvised, and pressed forward. From the perspective of our war council, it became evident that we had underestimated an essential variable. We had assumed technological superiority equated to inevitable victory, that predictable patterns governed every battlefield. Yet these humans, so fragile, so seemingly unprepared, had rewritten the rules. The war was no longer ours to command. Our armadas, once symbols of unstoppable dominance, now moved through a labyrinth of human ingenuity, unpredictability, and resolve. And then came the critical observation that cemented dread in our ranks. They were willing to die, not out of ignorance or fearlessness, but out of choice. Entire squads sacrificed themselves for the collective, timing their actions with precision, striking at the right moment, retreating only when their contribution was complete. It was not senseless courage. It was purposeful, almost ritualistic. And in that purpose, we recognized something that would haunt our calculations for all cycles to come. Humans fought not to survive alone. They fought to endure together. For the first time in millennia, a species had demonstrated the ability to turn our own assumptions against us. Fleets that should have dominated were neutralized before deployment. Battalions that should have secured objectives were rerouted into traps of our own making. Every engagement revealed flaws in our doctrine. Every encounter dismantled our certainty. By the time darkness fell on the horizon of the largest human metropolis, the tide had turned decisively. Our forces, once the embodiment of control, were now reacting, scrambling, improvising, and for the first time, fearing the consequences of underestimating an opponent. Humans, small, fragile, primitive, had claimed the momentum. And from the silent vantage of our command decks, the truth became undeniable. The battle was no longer ours to dictate. The humans had not merely survived. They had awakened. And as reports of another coordinated counterstrike streamed in, the War Council realized the unthinkable. Victory might never be ours, the A. First reports reached the flagship before the sun had risen fully across the human cityscape. Counteroffensives. The word alone carried no weight in our lexicon. It implied reaction, not innovation, but as the data streamed across our sensors, disbelief rippled through every level of command. Human forces, previously thought fragile and disorganized, had seized the initiative. Every calculation we had made, every projection of predictable resistance, now unraveled before our eyes. From orbit, the city had transformed. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, power conduits had become instruments of war. Cranes tipped, beams fell, water lines flooded, entire districts acted as improvised artillery against our advancing units. Buildings, which we had presumed fragile, had been fortified in ways both subtle and devastating. Walls hidden with metal plating, scaffolding used as cover for ambushes, underground passages rerouted entire enemy battalions into traps. Civilians once thought irrelevant to combat became extensions of the strategy. They directed forces, obstructed vehicles, and created diversions, all without command, all seemingly instinctive. The ingenuity was breathtaking. Our intelligence arrays detected patterns in human tactics that resembled algorithmic structures, yet they were improvised in real time. Units operated in synchronous complexity, seemingly spontaneous but devastatingly effective. Our fleets attempted orbital strikes, yet entire formations were redirected, rerouted, and neutralized by structures we had assumed immobile. Ground forces attempting occupation were funneled into narrow corridors where even minor resistance inflicted catastrophic losses. It was as if every element of the battlefield had been anticipated, not by computation, but by an instinctive intelligence that defied explanation. Our commanders faltered under the strain. Panic began to spread like a virus through the ranks. Reports of losses accumulated with alarming speed, entire battalions neutralized without significant engagement. Dropships destroyed in what should have been unopposed landings, artillery silenced before firing a shot. Each failure fed into the next, creating a cascading sequence of strategic uncertainty. Even our elite units, trained to operate under extreme adversity, hesitated, their confidence fractured by the sheer unpredictability of human action. Observing from orbit, the unity of the humans became impossible to ignore. Strangers risked everything for one another, forming an unbroken chain of resilience. Children, elderly and soldiers alike moved with purpose, each action reinforcing the next. Small squads, isolated from command, improvised with precision, adapting to evolving threats as if guided by a single consciousness. Entire populations coordinated defensive maneuvers without orders, turning cities into labyrinthine fortresses where conventional dominance was meaningless. We attempted to regroup. Fleets repositioned, ground forces reorganized, and artillery recalibrated. Yet each human response rendered our adjustments ineffective. Our best strategists, those whose calculations had never failed, now recalculated in futility. The battlefield shifted beneath our feet faster than any model could predict. Zones assumed safe became contested, supply lines became death traps, and our carefully constructed offensive plans collapsed under the weight of improvisation and relentless persistence. The humans' innovation extended beyond simple tactics. They used misdirection, sacrifice, and deception as integrated weapons. One unit might feign surrender, drawing forces into a position primed for ambush. Civilians would act in tandem, obstructing reinforcements or delivering concealed explosives. Structures collapsed strategically, flooding streets or creating impassable choke points. Each engagement carried layers of intent invisible to our sensors, yet felt viscerally across the battlefield. Our troops reported confusion, hesitation, and fear, a foreign sensation in soldiers accustomed to dominance. Even the young participated in this unquantifiable strategy. Adolescents and children improvised, adapted. One boy rerouted a small drone into a collapsing alleyway, neutralizing our forward observation unit. Another group of children coordinated to manipulate debris, redirecting an armored convoy into a trap. The line between civilian and combatant blurred, yet the effectiveness was undeniable. Our losses mounted not from superior firepower, but from their creativity and collective determination. Entire cities became instruments of human ingenuity. Streets twisted into mazes, vertical structures concealed hidden sniper teams, and communication networks provided real-time updates across neighborhoods. Even when infrastructure was destroyed, humans adapted, using the remnants of their environment as cover, creating impromptu defenses, and maintaining operational cohesion. Every failure we inflicted seemed temporary, every victory ephemeral. The more we attacked, the more resilient they became. We began to recognize a disturbing pattern. Humans fought not because they expected survival, not because they possessed technological superiority, but because they were willing. Will alone had become a weapon, resilience a shield. Each loss only reinforced the collective resolve. Captured units inspired their kin, not demoralizing but invigorating others to continue. Actions were communicated without speech, coordinated without command. A network of instinct and experience that operated beyond our ability to model. Our orbital observers documented something unprecedented. Entire battalions halted in awe, scanning for threats, reacting to invisible signals. The humans' unity, strangers working seamlessly together, undermined centuries of assumption about the nature of conflict. Even isolated units exhibited cohesion, improvising complex strategies on the fly. The battlefield itself seemed to bend around their will, and with each engagement, they dictated the tempo of war. Losses became catastrophic. Supply lines were severed, reinforcements ambushed, tactical strongpoints neutralized before engagement. Even when we appeared to recover, humans adapted instantly, reasserting control. Their improvisation was relentless, their foresight uncanny, their cohesion unbreakable. Entire theaters of operation, planned in precise detail, collapsed under the unpredictable flow of human action. From the command bridge, a single thought crystallized into dread. This was no ordinary species. Fragile though they appeared, humans had become a force that could not be eliminated through conventional measures. Our technology, our training, our numbers, none could fully overcome their essence. They fought not merely with arms, but with something intangible. Something that infused every action, every strategy, every defensive and offensive maneuver. And then came the most damning realization. Even in the face of annihilation, humans adapted, improvised, and persisted. Entire fleets were rerouted into trap-laden cities, yet small squads navigated the chaos with precision, striking at weak points with devastating effect. Civilians facilitated these operations, turning neighborhoods into fortresses and corridors into weapons. Our losses mounted, our confidence eroded, and every recalibration seemed doomed to fail. By the time darkness fell on the largest city, the battlefield had transformed entirely. We no longer dictated terms. Humans, once assumed weak, had seized initiative on every front. Our forces, trained, equipped, and confident, were now reacting. Every prediction had failed. Every expectation was overturned. What we had anticipated as a fleeting engagement had evolved into a war of endurance, innovation, and indomitable will. And from the observation decks, the truth was undeniable. Humanity, fragile yet unyielding, had redefined the calculus of war. Their unity, ingenuity, and resilience were forces that no technology could suppress. They were not merely surviving, they were seizing control, dictating the pace, and transforming the battlefield into a maze we could not navigate. The first true counterstrike was underway, and as the humans' improvisations spread like wildfire across the war theaters, it became clear. The tide had not only turned, it had broken against us. The remnants of our command satellites orbited the scarred surface of the planet, observing a conflict that had long since surpassed every prediction, every simulation, every calculation we had relied upon. We had anticipated chaos, desperation, and disorder, but we did not anticipate brilliance born from the very crucible of annihilation. Human forces, weakened, battered, and technologically inferior, had transformed our expectations entirely. Every maneuver we had prepared, every formation intended to dominate, had become irrelevant. The battlefield no longer responded to our strategies. It responded to theirs. From the observation arrays, we could see the intricacy of their design. They had turned our own technology against us, repurposing captured drones, reprogramming systems, and exploiting the rigidity of our automated war machines. What we assumed would be an advantage, our precision weaponry, our drones, our orbiting artillery, had become tools of their ingenuity. Entire fleets were ambushed by weapons they had learned to manipulate, entire battalions neutralized without a direct strike. Our calculations, once precise, now faltered at every turn. No algorithm could anticipate the improvisation, the adaptability, the sheer audacity of their tactics. Ordinary humans had become extraordinary. Leaders of small units, by any measure inconsequential, orchestrated acts that reshaped entire theaters of engagement. Their decisions were precise, almost surgical, executed with timing and creativity that our command systems could not model. One strike, coordinated across multiple city sectors, routed a formation that should have been impenetrable. Another maneuver, improvised at the last moment, destroyed key orbital drones before reinforcements could intervene. The humans did not fight with overwhelming force. They fought with perfect timing, audacity, and insight. Even from our distant vantage point, the courage of their species radiated outward. Units once considered expendable became catalysts of victory. Civilians, children, and the wounded acted in ways that defied any reasonable prediction. Entire neighborhoods became instruments of strategy, coordinated not through formal command, but through instinct, communication, and collective purpose. The planet itself seemed alive with resistance, as if the humans had imbued the very terrain with willpower and intelligence. We realized too late the essence of what had been underestimated. It was not machinery, numbers, or firepower that defined this species. It was spirit. Courage distilled into action. Will transformed into strategy. Every loss, every injury, every sacrifice strengthened the resolve of others. Even captured units influenced the living, inspiring acts of defiance that rippled across the battlefield. Our fleets, once the pinnacle of domination, faltered. Ships scattered, formations broke, automated targeting systems misfired. Human ingenuity had turned our precision against us. What should have been annihilation had become an unrelenting, escalating nightmare. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion. The logic that had ensured conquest for millennia failed utterly in the face of an enemy that could not be measured, quantified, or subdued by conventional methods. And then came the decisive moment. From what remained of our orbital command, we observed a coordinated strike unlike any before. Humans had combined every element, terrain, improvisation, captured systems, and timing, into a single devastating maneuver. The impact was swift, precise, and absolute. Entire units of our fleet were disabled simultaneously, without warning, without conventional engagement. The sky above the planet erupted in a pattern of chaos that was not chaotic but orchestrated, deliberate, and irreversible. Our analysts attempted to interpret the events, but it was too late. The humans had demonstrated an intelligence that transcended computation. Their actions were neither reckless nor random. They were calculated, adaptive, and infused with something no machine could replicate: understanding. They understood the battlefield, the enemy, and the consequences of each act in a way that merged intuition with precision. And in that understanding, they triumphed. From the surface, we could observe the aftermath. Human leaders, ordinary in appearance, guided their people with calm authority, inspiring acts that amplified the success of each strike. Their eyes reflected resolve, their voices directed with certainty. Units that had suffered losses immediately regrouped, improvising new strategies that ensured continuity of resistance. Even the young, those we had assumed irrelevant, continued to contribute, their small bodies moving with purposeful intent. Their actions magnified in effect by collective coordination. The planet itself bore the scars of battle, cities fractured, streets impassable, infrastructure shattered, but the human species endured. They moved among the devastation with resilience, silent yet unbowed, each individual part of a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. We, observers and invaders, understood for the first time that domination was impossible because we had confronted not merely a species, but a force, a living testament to courage, ingenuity, and spirit. Panic rippled across our command as the final realization settled in. The humans had redefined warfare. Victory was no longer guaranteed by firepower, technology, or numerical superiority. The calculus had shifted. Our best strategists, those who had guided fleets to victory across countless systems, now recalculated only to find defeat unavoidable. Every contingency had been anticipated, every maneuver countered, every expectation overturned, and in that moment, our retreat began, not as a strategic withdrawal, but as a flight. Ships scattered across the void, carrying commanders and survivors, leaving the planet and its unbroken defenders behind. The humans had not merely survived, they had triumphed. The species we had considered inferior had demonstrated superiority, not in machinery or armament, but in essence. From the command satellites, we watched as they stood victorious. The war had ended not in destruction, but in revelation. Humanity, battered and scarred, remained unbroken. Their world, though wounded, was alive with the promise of endurance and renewal. And as we fled, scattering across the stars to lick wounds we had never anticipated, one truth became unavoidable. We had been defeated by courage, ingenuity, and will. We would never forget. The humans had risen where we had expected them to fall. And their lesson, resilience, audacity, spirit, would echo across the stars far longer than the fleets we had brought against them. In that silence of space, as our scattered armadas fled into the void, a new understanding crystallized. Superiority is not given, it is earned. And in spirit, in resolve, in courage, the humans were supreme. The stars themselves seemed quieter as we departed, as if the universe had paused to acknowledge the victory of the fragile, yet indomitable. And somewhere on that blue planet, humans walked among the ruins, unbowed, silent, victorious. The last sight our sensors would record before retreating into the void. Haunted forever by the species that had rewritten the rules of war. The reckoning had come. And we had lost.